if we look to the realities of Black women, first of all, we see that Black women are not immune from the kinds of policing, the kinds of surveillance, stop, arrests, and violence that Black cisgender men face. We know that Black women are stopped disproportionately compared to both white women and white men. We know that Black women are dramatically incarcerated, vastly over the rate of white women who are incarcerated. We can look to the death of Shabrana Abdi, who is a Black Somali transgender woman, who of course was dragged down several flights of stairs by the police and died in 2003. The recent case of Majiza Phillip, a Black woman in Montreal who had her arm broken by the police and then herself was criminally charged, to see that Black women are not immune from the very direct kinds of police violence that Black men face. But it's also important, I think, that if we look to the realities of Black women, we see that actually even more clearly, the policing is not just the police, right? So if we look to the heightened surveillance of Black families, particularly poor Black women, by Child and Family Services, we know that Black children are more likely to be apprehended, are spending far longer in care, the care that is often negligent and harmful in and of itself, that this removal from families is a kind of punishment of Black families, that particularly targets the parenting of poor Black women. And we need to understand this as such. And if we don't actually understand this as a kind of racial profiling, as a kind of violence that we need to address the same way that we need to address carding and its impacts on young Black men, then we're missing a crucial element of actually the kind of harm that is being done to the Black community more broadly. If we look to the realities of schools, we again see similar issues where we know that that the school to prison pipeline means that Black kids are being disproportionately expelled, disproportionately suspended, and a significant treatment of Black moms, and it's often Black moms trying to advocate for their kids, is a part of that criminalization within the school system. So again, if we really want to understand the policing of Black people's lives, understanding the gendered way that this works actually helps us to see policing and harm in far more institutions. It's also really, if we also even think about the case of the 6-year-old Black girl in the Peel School region who was handcuffed hand and feet, right? It's just really important for us to understand that age is no protection, that being understood or read as female is no protection from the harm of policing itself. Now, if we want to speak intersectionally in a different way, of course, it's really important for us to understand the way that ableism and the way that mental health also is exacerbated by, and really is something that makes even more deadly the kinds of anti-Black racism that we have in our society. So 70% of police killings over the last 20 years in Canada are people who had mental health or substance abuse issues, right? And again, vastly disproportionately people who are Black, people who are Indigenous. So if we're not understanding the confluence of those factors, then we're really missing a crucial way in which Black people are dying, right? And we can look to recent cases where Black people or their families had called the police for help in a mental health crisis, like the situation of DeAndre Campbell, or a Black Indigenous woman, Regis Karshinsky-Peke, who ended up dying in the context of police interactions. So there again, we see the absolute failure on every front of policing to protect Black people. And we see also the ways in which the policing of Black people, the surveillance of Black communities, is not only embedded into policing and the prison system in Canada, but it's absolutely integral that we see this in the child welfare system, in the education system as well. So it's actually in having an intersectional perspective that we're able to fully understand the depth to which anti-Blackness and the policing of Black life has permeated our society so completely. And that's essential if we're going to have meaningful efforts to actually reduce the violence of policing. The work to defund and abolish police is something that absolutely comes from a Black feminist tradition. In many ways, it's about survivors. A really important part of this intellectual and political lineage comes from survivors of sexual violence, who of course often were again harmed by police when they attempted to defend themselves. And that is looking at that failure and the work that comes from people who've experienced sexual violence and other kinds of violence, that some of the really powerful growth of the police defunding, that the police abolition moves makes all the more powerful, right? It's coming already from an intersectional place that those, particularly those who would most need protection in our society, so people living with mental health issues, people who are homeless, people who are outside of the traditional gender paradigm, who are actually the most vulnerable to police violence. So if we're going to consider safety, removing police from all of these situations is one important step towards doing that, as well as, of course, addressing the conditions that have abandoned people in the first place, right? Which is lack of access to decent and safe housing, which is the fact that women's shelters are so drastically underfunded that they're almost continuously full, which is the fact that there's the lack of even decent access to food and transit, which means that people, again, are just in conditions of depravity. It's addressing those conditions as opposed to policing the people who actually need support in those conditions that needs to be how we actually respond as a society.
Sounds